Good day everyone, so I hope you've all been doing really well. In this video we'll be looking at two Ayaka footages, one in which I'll play incorrectly and in one version where I'll play correctly, and we'll hopefully discuss like why we get such very different outcomes and so on. Now what inspired this video is the fact that I've been looking at a lot of like Genshin content creators, streamers, Fury crafters, and the gameplay that they put out, and I wasn't convinced that the quality of gameplay that we see is actually good. Now, do keep in mind there are exceptions. Some of the content creators can put out some really good quality gameplay, especially the speedrunning community. But for the majority, 80% of the content creators, the gameplay really does lag. So what you'll see right now is the exact same sequence, and I'm not kidding. This is the exact same sequence that I saw someone play. And you will notice the big differences between the sequence they've used and the more or less correct sequence that you should be using. And I think it'll be a very good like educational opportunity. So yeah, we've got the typical Ayaka freeze team. So let's see what it can do. So right off the bat, we're here. We're going to obviously do a VV shred. We're going to sort of put down the Kokomi jellyfish, the Shenhe field. We do a bit of Icy Quill, there's Ayaka, and I'm not kidding, I did this in the exact same order that I sort of saw it, and what do you know, well, yeah, look at that, we're just slightly below halfway of its health, and it's not really that impressive, also considering that these are C6 R5 units. This is really not that good. So what went wrong here? Well, I'll explain that in just a bit, but let's just look at the correct way in which you should be playing this. Now, hopefully you'll notice some of the differences, not just in terms of what you can see in terms of gameplay, but just look at the enemy's health bar in just a bit. And no, I did not even cast my Kokomi jellyfish. You could certainly do that, but you'll notice here that, look at that, we've eaten so much of the enemy's health that if I can pretty much make a very confident bet that if there wasn't like this little barrier or like invulnerability phase, we would have probably one-shotted the perpetual mechanical ray in that sense. So what went wrong with the one example where we ended up here and the other example? I mean, we swirled the crowd, so we reduced the crowd resistance and all of these things, and yeah, let's just unpack it. Right, so let's just quickly go back to where we were in the beginning, and let me explain to you why the sequence that I played here, the correct sequence, or one of the more correct sequences, actually works like so well. So as you can see here, right off the bat, when I press my E ability, my tap E, I dashed forward. So this is kind of a very important thing. You get into the correct positioning, and you want to tap E here because you can get an elemental burst buff, which Ayaka in this case, and I think I'm pretty sure of it, can snapshot in that sort of buff. So this is kind of very important. And then of course we want to just put up Shenhe's like little ice field and whatever, because it's got a very long cooldown, and by the time we sort of cycle through all of our abilities, we want Shenhe with a high sort of cost burst to be sort of batteried up like for the next cycle and so on. So this is how we sort of start off. Then we go here with Sucrose herself, so we animation cancel, we definitely swirl. Now she's not Kazuha, so you have to use her elemental burst to gain a bit of an extra like cryo damage bonus that Ayaka can also snapshot and so on. But yeah, we've reduced the enemy's resistance. Here's Kokomi. Kokomi's got the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer. You could cast your jellyfish ability right here and have Kokomi carry a tenacity sort of artifact set, and that would give your Ayaka 68% like attack buff, which you'll also snapshot as well. And as you can see here, I'm just sort of dashing towards the enemy. If you dash towards the enemy and you hit him, you gain another 18% cryo damage bonus for your Ayaka. Now this enemy did not stand still, he went up, so this is slightly working against my favor. So if he had been standing still here instead, we would have been quite lucky, because one of the things that you want to do is you want your Shenhe's Icy Quill, that one that you casted in the beginning, you want that to almost act sort of like as a bit of additional front-loaded damage that you do, and then by the time you get here, you now have a sort of refreshed like Icy Quill here that you can now activate, which now gives you an additional big burst or jump in like damage that your yeah, you can see here it went up, that your Ayaka's burst will do. And obviously if you've got the Shenhe C1, you can like almost like double layer it. So in this case I've actually gotten 3 instances of Shenhe's Icy Quills onto my Ayaka burst just by the way in which I like sort of played it, and this allows me to do a massive amount of additional damage. And we've definitely snapshotted the sort of buff onto Ayaka. Ayaka snapshotted the cryo buff. There's the cryo resistance shred. There's the Kokomi buff that's been sort of snapshotted. So Ayaka herself is doing a tremendous amount of damage, and she can only do this because we played in the correct order. So what happened, or what went wrong in this other example? Well, now that you know sort of what went wrong and so on, let's sort of see how to do this like correctly. Let me just quickly skip a bit forward. There we go. So right off the bat, you don't want to start off here with Ayaka. So yes, you can do this, but by the time you're going to cast your Elemental Burst later, you would have lost the cryo damage bonus from sort of exiting your like little alternative sprint animation. So this in and of itself might seem logical. You know, you're now going to shred the what do you call it, enemy's cryo resistance. Here's Kokomi, you put down the little jellyfish. But I mean, right now you're in a bit of a problem, because if you go from Kokomi to Shenhe, you don't get the buff onto Ayaka, and that's like kind of the big thing. You also now see here that your Shenhe herself cannot benefit from any particles that Ayaka could funnel to her in any sort of case, so that's kind of problematic, and you're now wasting an elemental skill here which can also then funnel particles later on to your Ayaka. So it's quite a lot of things that are not happening here. So the big problem is Kokomi's attack buff and Shenhe's sort of buffs and all these things were not layered correctly, and that means the damage output that we get is significantly lower. And this is kind of like the big problem with this sort of like gameplay. If you don't layer your abilities and cooldowns and all of these things, you're not gonna stack all the buffs throughout the Genshin Impact damage equation, and there are certainly quite a lot of buffs to stack. So for instance, Shenhe herself gives you that elemental burst damage bonus. She shreds the opponent's cryo resistance. Characters that are in the field right here get an additional cryo damage bonus. Obviously, if you have Shenhe's T2, you get an additional crit cryo damage bonus as well, and you get the icicles. It's like Shenhe's got quite a bit of utility. She's got 3 buffs at C0 and 4 buffs at C1, C2, sorry, sort of packed into her kit. And if you don't give all of these buffs to your Ayaka, together with the resistance shred and obviously attack buff from Kokomi, if you don't layer all of these things correctly, your damage is gonna lack. And some of you might be very astute and so on and say, well, what if you just like used your Shenhe calls again to stack more damage? But even if I did that here, I might have only gotten to, like, let's say even the 75% mark of the PMA's health, whereas in the other example it was quite clear we are doing so much damage that if there wasn't a cap here, we could have potentially even taken him out. And that is the key to sort of understanding that Genshin Impact is not just about randomly mashing buttons. Yes, there are teams that favor random mashings of buttons and so on, but a lot of the meta or the top tier results that you could get from the game really do involve like precise timing, overlapping, and knowing when to use which abilities and even which order to sort of put your team in, so that you can start off with the correct character. And that's just sort of what today's video is all about. Now obviously some of these things might be obvious to you, especially if you're an AR60 player and so on, but for those of you that sort of have not seen this, hopefully it's been educational. Alright, and that's it from my side. Thanks for watching. Cheers.